Hello and welcome to week 11 in our 12-week class on developmental psych. Not only are we going to go into chapter 9, but you have a couple very important due dates this week. Your biography and biography reflections are due this coming week. I'm also going to be adding I think I might create a quiz for you to give me some feedback on the quest activities that were in this class. Now, I've already committed to use these next semester, but it's an ongoing evaluation process to see, were they fun? Did they help you understand concepts? I'll have a few questions in there, and I believe it may be that you have been receiving some requests from the quest people themselves asking you for some information there, and I would really like you to participate in that. It's part of the deal that we have to make this free for this semester. It's going to cost students a little bit of money next semester, not a lot, to have that feature, so I'm giving it a whirl. I hope it's been a fairly positive experience in terms of understanding the concepts that are related in there. I will be doing less of them, so I already think there's too many of them, so I will be doing less of them. I'll be looking forward to your feedback, so make sure to help me out that you do that quiz and that you get your biography and your biography reflection, and I'm looking forward to them. I've already learned with some of the stuff that we've done in class. I've already learned about what you are learning about your subjects and the interesting characters that you are encountering. So moving right into chapter 9. Chapter 9 is about late adulthood, taking on the last stage. And I love this picture, great picture. I hope this is me, not that far away. Except I don't know how to hula hoop. So I'm going to make that real, not only do I need to remain active, not only do I need to stay fit, I actually need to learn how to hula hoop, so I'll probably have to work on that. I also encourage you to go look at this video. This is linked inside the course book. It's an entertaining video about people of all late ages who have engaged
Hi,
in
I'm John Green. Welcome to my salon. This is Mental Floss Video.
And I'm switching slides over here. Sorry about that. A little distracting myself. People who have engaged in activities in late life, and it's great. We have this sort of image of late life being all about decline, and it is. We have to die, and that's the pathway to it. But it doesn't need to be sitting in the rocking chair waiting for the Grim Reaper to come along. It's not. It can be active, and certainly, as I'm going to talk about at the end of today's chapter, the concept of living well straight for the entire life leading to your own death is really something that is within your power to decide about. Early things that you do now, earlier in your life, but also things that you do when you're old. So we're going to first take the biological view, look at this, why we age. Here we have this image of a person who's this aging, this changing process. Now, what is it about this? Why do we actually go through this process? Why aren't we immortal? Why don't we create new cells in our bodies and just keep right on going? And this is actually confused. This is not a straightforward answer. It's not like, hey, that's the way it is or anything. It's like, well, why does it happen? I mean, my body replaces cells on my skin throughout my life. Maybe it's a myth, probably 7 times or something like that. Replace all the cells. But yet, there's an end to it. There's a time at which the cells no longer replicate. There's something going on within our DNA, those kind of things. So we had to come up with some ideas as to why we actually age. And you have these external changes like we saw in that picture, but also eventually dying. So first we look at the genetics, and there's actually a Grim Reaper. And this is DNA damage and mitochondria damage that actually occurs over time and is built into the genetic code. A literally suicide gene. And I don't mean that, I don't say that lightly and to kind of group it in with, real suicidal ideation and stuff like that. But the idea is that there are actually mechanisms that destroy existing tissue and existing organelles, such as the mitochondria within our cells, and they just are killed off. And that's been observed. It seems to be a genetic property within our bodies. So that's one of the reasons why we experience aging and death. So the other, here we have, when again looking at the genetic component, we have the cellular clock theory and telomeres. Now, telomeres are represented by, you have the DNA molecule, the double helix molecule, and it wraps up and it becomes a chromosome. Like, this is artistic representation, but here's a chromosome. And at the end of the connected DNA material is a material called telomerase. And telomerase acts very much, you'll see this analogy all the time, it acts very much like the plastic tips on the ends of shoelaces. So you can imagine all the fibers of your shoelace being the DNA, the full shoelace is the chromosome, and at the end you have these plastic tips that are sort of keeping it from fraying. Every time a cell undergoes mitosis and divides, the telomerase on the end of the chromosome gets shorter and shorter and shorter until it can no longer keep the end of the shoelace together and it begins to fray. And if you've ever had that experience, you know that it's just a matter of time. You can't get that shoelace through the hole anymore and you need to get new shoelaces. Maybe put a little tape on it to get a while for a while. But it's the presence of that telomerase. And in fact, that's been implicated in the loosening of the tension within my skin that then leads to wrinkles, to the change in my hair color that leads me to have gray hair, to muscle tissue degradation, to loss of vision, loss of hearing, and stuff like that. And all of that has been connected to cellular death associated with reduced telomeres that sort of give it, the cell can only divide a certain number of times before there's just no replacement cells. And experimentation on, much less sophisticated organisms than us, like little nematodes is the study that I read about, little nematode worms. And they've been able to increase the telomerase on the genetic material within those organisms and have extended those organisms' life multiple times. And not only extended the life, but extended presumably the quality of life. The actual aging components that we're able to identify on the worm itself disappear. This is very interesting kind of work that's going on. So it's not so much that we would extend life with this technology from, old age would just be really long. It's that all the stages would be really long. So, well, maybe not the childhood ones, but like at age 56, I might just quit being a psychologist and go start a whole new career because I have another 40, 50 years to go. So stuff like that. So that's one of the, so right now we have the Grim Reaper built into our genetic code that actually kills off cells. We have the cellular clock theory and telomerase, which is the cell can only divide a certain number of times before the telomerase is gone, and then that's it. And then finally we have free radicals. Now, free radicals are a culprit of the modern world. Now, pollution, for example, produces a lot of free radicals, and therefore, those free radicals, because if you look at this image, of course, this is not what they really look like in real life. This is an example, but you see the molecule on the right-hand side is missing an electron. That means if it bumps into a part of your body, this molecule, this free radical, bumps into your body, it's going to steal an electron, and it's going to cause damage. It's going to cause what we call a burn. It's the kind of the chemical, what we mean when things burn is it's an exchange of electrons, and it's a chemical process when you see a fire. So burning in that chemical sense is what happens with free radicals. Now, in addition to that genetic stuff that's going on, free radicals, we also have immune system and hormone changes that happen that result in our inability over time to fight off disease. So certainly we saw that in the pandemic that's going on right now, that people who were elderly, see, it's the way this disease sort of works is it's a disease that affects the ability for someone to fight off diseases. I mean, having a pulmonary disease, respiratory disease, it diminishes our ability to fight off colds and flu and whatnot. And it was particularly impactful for the elderly who have immune system changes and those kinds of effects and hormone changes going on as we age. Now, in addition to that, I mean, it keeps on going, right? Stress. Stress increases the release of cortisol, and if we have chronic stress, that results in all of these things around here. We have anxiety, depression, headaches. Look at the one on the top, a weakened immune system, heart disease, high blood pressure, high blood sugar, the combination of stress and poor eating habits, digestive issues, nerve problems, all of these when we have too much cortisol. Now, you might remember that cortisol is involved in the fight or flight response. So when we're stressed, we go into a fight or flight response, and cortisol is released into our body. Now, that is intended, at least from the point of view of evolutionary psychology, to prepare us just to defend ourselves or to run away or to act accordingly to preserve our lives and whatnot, which is a very rare circumstance in our world. And most of the time under social situations when we're under stress, expressing those kinds of angers and frustrations is actually not the way to go about it. We have to kind of push those down, rein in the emotions, social emotional intelligence, and keep ourselves from expressing ourselves in that particular way. That lack of being able to express those angers and frustrations, and I'm not advocating that we do, but because of that, if we are constantly under that sort of strain that produces that cortisol, our bodies really were not designed to be that worked up all the time. And so we get some damages around that. Now, one of the ways in which we look at death and life is through actuary tables that we call life expectancy tables. And it's an interesting concept in and of itself of what life expectancy means. And I want to make sure that we're clear about actually when you see this kind of thing, what does it mean? So here we have three charts. We have life expectancy for people in North America, life expectancy for people in Canada, life expectancy for people in the United States. You can see men are the light blue, females the darker blue, and very similar across the point here. And we look at let's look at the Canadian one. Males in Canada have a life expectancy of 80. Females have a life expectancy of 84. And let me tell you what that actually means. It doesn't mean that the people currently living in Canada are going to live to, that the women currently are going to live to 84. When we have life expectancy tables, they're always dated. So let's say these were dated 2021. What that actually means is based on current technology and projections, and healthcare and whatnot, that people born in 2020, 50% of them will still be alive 84 years from now. That's what that means. It means that kids born in 2020, half of them will still be alive, the other half will be dead from 84. At 84. So to get a projection of what my life span would presumably be, I'd have to go to an actuary table from 1965 and look at see what the projections were. Now, of course, technology has an effect on this. I mean, there's certainly medical technology and whatnot that will probably extend my lifespan beyond that. But if I look, let's say if I look at the American one, it says 76. That's for people born right now, born in a newborn 2021. 76 years from now, 50% of them will have died. And so it's still a pretty good, indicator of, what's going on in the world. And, and we see these creeping up. Each generation is born into a world that's healthier and whatnot. And even with all of this stuff going on, we're getting clean water, cleaner air. There's, positive things still happening. Those battles are still producing good results. And but the actual term, you have to kind of go to your birth year, find that. So you can actually look that up. You can look up, what by the life expectancy for your birth year, and sort of get an estimate for that. There's actually all kinds of computer programs too out there. You can go to a website, put in your birthday, and it tells you that based on statistics. And so, okay. So this, of course, is very highly influenced by your lifestyle choices, behaviors, and habits that's kind of what I was indicating at the beginning about how important it is to make decisions now in terms of not only the extent to which you'll live, but the quality of that life in terms of your health. Now, one of the areas of aging in late life that is subject to a lot of speculation and sometimes a lot of misunderstanding is the subject of memory. So in order to have a really good discussion about what happens to memory in late life, let's look at some definitions of the types of memory that are really being, that are on the table when we talk about this. And the first one I want to talk about is episodic memory. Episodic memory is the type of memory that we have that has to do with events that happen. Like if somebody asks you, what did you have for dinner last week? Unless it was something really special, you're probably not going to remember it. So that's really not a good test of memory. But it's a remembering episodes, remembering recent events. The context of what was going on. What did you do yesterday? What did you do the day before? What not only what did you have for dinner, but what did you wear that day? Those kinds of things. That's memories of episodes in your recent life. This particular type of memory tends to decline, having a little fade a little bit there, tends to decline as we age. It's not necessarily declining so that it's gone. That would be an indication of something pretty serious going on. But these are the things that might fade. And there's different theories about that. There's all, I think when I'm 79 years old, I'm not going to really care about what I had for dinner the day before. Maybe my give a damn is busted, and I'm just not really taking a lot of time to make sure I remember these things that have been going on lately. So there might be some factor in there, and I'm just going to focus on the very memorable things. Like say, I might not be able to remember what I had for dinner, or even what I wore, but I remember if my granddaughter came by, because I would want to remember that. And so outside of any disease process, it's probably the focus of attention, the same way we remember things now, when we effortlessly put forth the desire to remember something, it applies in late life as well. But in general, we tend to see this somewhat decline in episodic memory. There are two other kinds of memory: somatic memory, the meanings of words and concepts, and autobiographical memory, meaning my lifespan, my story. These tend not to fade. It is extremely rare that someone has a memory issue that they lose the meanings of words, like what a chair and a table is. Pretty rare. And individuals usually have a pretty good autobiographical memory. In fact, you are experiencing these things in your biographies when you're talking to someone. And now, memory itself is nodal, and that means, and I'm pretty sure some of you have had the experience that when you're talking about something with your subject, it brings up other related memories, sometimes just abstractly related. An individual will be talking about a trip they took, and then they remember something that happened in high school because there's some sort of connection between those. And sometimes the real task of this assignment is not so much getting the stories, but putting everything in chronological order, because as people are remembering them, they may be disjointed, they may be all over the place. So that becomes a task. The point, however, is that the autobiographical memory is intact. It's still there. In fact, we recognize that between the ages of 10 and 30 is probably where the most accurate memories are. But external and internal memory aids can trigger existing memories to the front. A smell. You experience this now. You might just be going, I have a long history as a child working the harvest in northern Maine on potato farms. So the smell of freshly tilled dirt has a lot of emotional memory attached to it. And so whenever I smell that smell, it's a very vivid image, and lots of different stories and the good and bad of that labor that I did when I was a kid are fresh in my mind. I'm like, where were those up until now? I had to go. It seems like I was digging in the archives for these, but they seem to be right there. And so those kinds of memories remain intact, and very much when you are doing your biography, you are probably experiencing how rich those stories can be. Some of them, they're gone. Some of them, they've been reconstructed. So if you might have the two people in the room and one says, that didn't happen that way, because there's a certain amount of reconstruction that we do every time we access a memory. But nonetheless, the story remains intact. And largely, one of the tasks of late life is to kind of weave that together into a tapestry, let's say, that represents our life. And that is my segue to the next theory that I want to talk about, and that is Ericksons' final stage. Here, look over here on the bottom left, maturity, ego integrity versus despair. What Erickson thought, and what he observed and wrote about, was that in late life, it was a time of reflection. That we would think back about our lives, and we've gone through midlife, where we have had potentially a midlife event, midlife crisis. We've discussed that. Make changes while we still can. In late life, we're looking at now, our bed is made. The life that we've led has been led. We're at the ending laps of our race in life, and an evaluation, kind of how well did I do? What is my legacy? What did I decide well? What did I not decide well? And I weave together, and it's really that sort of creating a picture, very creative process, hence potentially full of errors from what really happened, but nonetheless, it is the construction of my story. And this goes right back to the beginning of, cognitive development when we were talking about Piaget and assimilation and accommodation. The schema, the big schema that I'm working on is my life. And I'm accommodating and I'm incorporating and I'm assimilating information throughout to create an image. And let's call it the puzzle, like in my puzzle pieces theory, to create and finish that puzzle. What does it look like? Am I proud of it? And from Ericksons' point of view, we have that decision or that place to the degree that we will have lived our lives with integrity, that there's a match between what we wanted to do and what we actually did, that we have a life that we can be proud of, that it produced what we want, we produced something. And it could, it doesn't have to be great success. Not everyone's going to be a Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or something like that. But certainly that kind of, what did I accomplish in my life? What did I do? And a vision of that, creating that. Or despair. And the despair comes from that notion that now it's too late. That's it. And I want to briefly tell you a story that I encountered when I was a social worker. I'm going to make this really quick. I had two clients, both of whom were dying. Both of whom had diabetes and multiple complications, lost limbs, going blind. I mean, all the stuff all over. Now, one individual that I met was this gentleman who was living in a one room, in a rooming house, shared bathroom and kind of thing. And he needed some extra assistance, but his insurance wasn't going to cover anymore. He did reveal to me that he had a son that lived out west in California who was an attorney, and that son might help him. When I contacted that son, he was very clear that he did not want to hear anything about his father, did not want to hear, quote, call me when he's dead so I can throw a party. Clearly an individual who did not nurture a long-term relationship with their kids. As it turns out, his backstory was that he was an alcoholic, he was abusive, neglectful, and essentially entered into this last phase in his life in deep despair. He was an angry man. He lashed out at people, lashed out the people that were working with him, and I present that he probably passed away in misery. Contrast that with this other client that I had, that I showed up at her house. She lived in Waterville. They both lived in Waterville. And she lived in her home. And I got there, and she wheeled, when I knocked on the door, she wheeled herself on her wheelchair because she didn't have any legs below the knee. And she wheeled over, and she opened the door for me, welcomed into her nice house, and she brought me over to the kitchen and served me tea, and was just gushing about the workers that were there and how nice they were. And I loved all the CNAs and the PCAs and the nurses and all that were coming in, and she's just going on, and she just, I hate to be a bother to them, and just the sweetest person who was going deaf, going blind, had neuropathy in her hands. She needed so much assistance. And she too needed more assistance than her insurance could provide. And the doctor had kind of got into her head that she needed 24-hour care. And so, and she didn't want to go into a facility. So just like with this gentleman, I said, do you have family around? She goes, oh, I have all kinds of family. I'm going to call them up. We're going to have a meeting and I'll take care of it. Just fine. That's okay. So I set up an appointment. A couple weeks later, I come in and I walk in, and nailed to the wall is a whiteboard with a schedule of sons, daughters, daughter-in-law, sons-in-law, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, everybody who's involved in this process of providing her with 24-hour care. And they provided her with 24-hour care to the end of her life. This whole schedule. And like this mother-in-law, this daughter-in-law is going to go and pick up this niece after school. They changed bus routes so the kids can get dropped off. It was just on and on. And I contrasted these two individuals, one who had nurtured a sense of connection with their kids and the other one that didn't, and how different their passing probably was. I would imagine, this is years ago, I might have known more in detail, but I'd imagine that the second person had what we would call a good death. And he was surrounded by family, able to say the things that they wanted to say, and living without regret, and certainly with integrity. Very profound. That instance has transformed my own experience with how I want to live my life. So very, very stark difference between those individuals. Now, we talk here about dying, but it really is about living right up until the time of death. So how do we end well? How do we age well, enter into this area of our lives, enter into this area of this age? What does it mean to do this well and to arrive? And the huge multi-generation study that is going on at Harvard University has revealed an answer to this, and that answer is quite straightforward, and that is friends, family, and community. Connection with other people. The truth is, when I look back at those two people that were on my caseload at that time, she was actually a lot more sick than he was. She had more pain, she had more disability. They were both very sick and close to death. But she was clearly more, but she had an attitude, she had connection with others, she had connections with people in the community, she had friends, and family, and it was just such a stark difference just in that one little case. And that has been reflected over and over, that our happiness in late life is not the money, it's not the job, it's not even our health. Something needs to take us out, so our health is going to decline. So it's not any of that, but our connections to family, friends, and community is what brings us happiness. Over and over and over in these longitudinal studies that they've been doing down there in Harvard have revealed this. Now, the social role of aging people, I try to address that, how important these individuals were. If you look at that case study, that second person, the lady who had all this family, how important her role was to all of her grandchildren, her nieces and nephews, and all that became involved in this thing. She had a very important and central role to play in their lives. And to explore that, I actually stole an essay and included in my class in this chapter called The Wagon Wheel by Dr. Robert Vian, who's since passed away, was an instructor that worked at KVCC, taught developmental psych, and he was an aging individual and wrote about aging. Very, very intelligent, very wizened individual, and wrote extensively about aging and the aging process. And this essay has survived that material. So I've included that essay and an opportunity for you to reflect on that. It has a lot to do with the role of the elderly in our society and are we really taking advantage of the elderly? In a positive way. Like, we have elderly people, like in my household right now, my mother-in-law lives upstairs from us. And when I tell people that, they sort of like, really? But having that wise presence actually provides for a lot of comfort in the household. So it's a very neat process. So read that essay, and one of the assessments that I'm having you do is to reflect on that and give like the first discussion, which let's talk about that. Talk about the elderly people in your life. Talk about maybe what you've learned from this individual who you're interviewing. I'm going to presume they're older than you, and to reflect on the role that they have as older, wizened individuals. And with that, I ask you to reflect upon memory and the experience you've had with your subject's memory and how well they put together their story. Kind of looking at, did they kind of forget that you had an appointment that day, but you start talking about things that are 30 years ago, and they go on and on with the story with detail and names and what they had for dinner this kind of how we organize this biographical memory is just a really neat thing to observe when you're doing a project such as this intense interview. So that brings us to the end of chapter 9 here. Just one more week to go after this. To occur after this one, and then we'll be done with the class. So try and get those biographies in. I'm going to start reading them as soon as they start coming in, and make sure you read the rubric. The rubric is pretty straightforward on the biography, number of pages, and then we have the reflection after that. And sometime this week, I'll be sending out the announcement that I'd put that quiz up there asking you about Quest. Make sure that you respond to the Quest inquiries that are out there from them directly, and they're interested in hearing your feedback on their product. And have a great week. And this is the home stretch. You can do this. The class has been wonderful so far. The discussions are amazing. The work is amazing. I hope I'm trying to reflect that when I tell you that I've graded something. And really, really good work. Keep it up just a couple more weeks. And then if you'll be coming back to KV, you actually have a little break. It doesn't go right up until the day of classes start. So you'll have a little bit of break to hopefully enjoy most of August when this is all done. So I will see you on the discussion boards, and have a great, great day.